Hello. You don't know me, and I intend to keep it that way. Call me Alex. It's not my real name, of course. My real name is, well, it's a name that's been listed on utility bills and tax forms for over 70 years. It's a normal name, and I've spent my entire adult life trying to be a normal man. But normality, it's a fragile thing. A thin sheet of ice over a very, very deep, dark lake. All it takes is one crack. I'm speaking to you now from my study. It's late. The rain is starting to tap against the window pane. It's a gentle sound, comforting. For most people. For me, it just reminds me of other nights. Other windows. A time when the world felt like it was tilting off its axis. The story I'm about to tell you isn't one you'll find in any official police report. It's not in the documentaries. And it's not in the best-selling books. It's a story I've held onto for over 50 years. A private ghost. Sometimes, I think I imagined it all. A product of a young, impressionable mind caught in the crossfire of a city-wide panic. But then, I'll see a face in a crowd. Or I'll read a line in a book. And the ice cracks. And I'm right back there. I'm right back in the fall of 1969. Northern California. A time of love and peace for some. But for the rest of us, it was the season of the Zodiac. And I think I met him. To understand my story, you have to understand the fear. You have to understand what was happening around me. Fear is a kind of weather. It changes the air you breathe. It makes familiar places feel alien. In 1969, the San Francisco Bay Area was living inside a storm of fear. It had started the year before, though most of us didn't know it yet. December 20th, 1968, a place called Lake Herman Road, out in Benicia. It's what you'd call a lover's lane. A dark, secluded stretch of pavement where kids would go to, well, to be kids, to get away from their parents. Two high school students, David Faraday, 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16. It was their first date. They parked his mother's Rambler in a gravel turnout. What happened next is clinical, brutal. Another car pulled up beside them. A man got out. He ordered them out of the car. David was shot once, at point-blank range, in the head. Betty Lou tried to run. She was shot 5 times in the back. A flurry of .22 caliber bullets. She made it 28 feet. The police found them. No motive, no witnesses, no suspects. It was just a brutal, senseless act of violence. The kind of thing you read about, shake your head, and then turn the page. Because it happened to someone else. Somewhere else. It wasn't our storm. Not yet. Then, 6 months later, the storm moved closer. July 4th, 1969, the Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo. Just a few miles from the first attack. Another lover's lane. Another young couple in a parked car. Darlene Ferrin, 22, and Mike Mageau, 19. This time, the killer was bolder. A car pulled up behind them. Its lights off. Then it drove away. A moment of relief, I imagine. A false dawn. Then the car returned, parking alongside them. The driver's side. The man who got out held a powerful flashlight. The kind that blinds you. Turns you into a deer in the headlights. Darlene and Mike thought it was a cop. He wasn't a cop. He said nothing. He just raised a 9mm pistol and opened fire. He fired into the open passenger window. Again and again. Mike was hit in the face, neck, and chest. Darlene was hit multiple times. The killer, seemingly satisfied, turned and walked back to his car. And this is where it gets theatrical. This is where the monster steps out of the shadows and onto the stage. Mike Mageau, despite his horrific injuries, was still alive. He started to moan in pain. The killer heard him, and he came back. He fired 2 more shots into each of them, then calmly drove away. Darlene Ferrin was dead on arrival at the hospital. Miraculously, impossibly, Mike Mageau survived. He gave a description: a white male, short, heavy-set, beefy, with a large face. It was something. It was a start. But the real introduction, that came less than an hour later. At 12:40 a.m. on July 5th, the phone rang at the Vallejo Police Department. The dispatcher, Nancy Slover, picked it up. A man's voice on the other end was calm, measured, without emotion. He said, "I wish to report a murder." "No. A double murder. They're 2 miles east of Columbus Parkway." They were in a white car, a Volkswagen Karmann Ghia. He gave the location of the park. He told them the weapon he used. And then, he claimed credit for the first crime. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye. That was the voice. The voice that started the nightmare. But the letters are what gave it a name. 3 weeks later, on July 31st, 1969, 3 envelopes arrived, one for the Vallejo Times-Herald, one for the San Francisco Chronicle, one for the San Francisco Examiner. Inside each was a letter. They were handwritten, in a messy, almost childish block script. They began, "Dear Editor, I am the killer of the 2 teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman Road and the girl on the 4th of July." He provided details only the killer could know. He was proving it was him. But that wasn't the main event. Enclosed with each letter was 1/3 of a cipher, a 408-symbol cryptogram, and a demand. He demanded they print his cipher on their front pages. If they didn't, he would go on a kill rampage that weekend. He would cruise around and pick off people. The letters were all signed with the same symbol, a circle with a crosshairs through it, a symbol that would be burned into the public consciousness, the mark of the Zodiac. And that's the world I was living in. I was 19 years old, a sophomore at UC Berkeley, and I worked nights at the university library, the Doe Memorial Library. It was my sanctuary, a beautiful, old building. You could smell the history, the scent of aging paper, bookbinding glue, and floor wax. I loved it. I was a history major. Being surrounded by all those books, all those lives and stories bound in leather and cloth, it felt safe. Solid. My job was simple. I worked the late shift, from 6 p.m. to midnight, re-shelving books, managing the circulation desk, and, for the last hour, just being a presence while the graduate students and the insomniacs finished their work. It was quiet, so quiet, you could hear your own thoughts. Too quiet, sometimes. The news about the Zodiac, it was everywhere. It was on the front page of the Chronicle that my roommate, Mark, would leave on our cluttered coffee table. It was on the transistor radio we kept on the kitchen counter. Talk of ciphers and lovers' lanes. Mark was obsessed. He was a math major. He'd spend hours with a notepad, trying to crack the 408 cipher, convinced he could do it. It's just a substitution cipher. Alex, he'd say, tapping his pencil. He's arrogant. He'll have used simple patterns. I found it morbid, disturbing. I tried to tune it out. I'd retreat to the library, to my world of dusty books, and ordered silence. The killer was in Vallejo, in San Francisco, a world away. Here, in the hallowed halls of Berkeley, there were only books, only history. That's what I told myself. It was a Tuesday night in early September. The city was thick with the humid, late summer heat. The library was an oasis of cool, circulated air. I was in the stacks on the 3rd floor. It was a labyrinth up there. Tall, metal shelves crammed so tightly together you had to turn sideways to get through. Most of the lights were on timers, so you'd walk down an aisle and the lights would flicker on ahead of you and die behind you. It was like walking through a tunnel of your own making. I was shelving a cart of books on medieval European history. Heavy, oversized things. I was focused. The familiar rhythm of the work. Find the call number. Find the shelf. Slide the book into its place. That's when I felt it. It's a feeling everyone knows. The feeling of being watched. A prickle on the back of your neck. A sudden, unfounded awareness of another presence. I stopped, a heavy tome on the Crusades in my hand. I listened. Nothing. Just the usual library sounds. The hum of the lights. The ghost of a whisper from the main reading room. Floors below. I shook my head. I told myself it was nothing. That the place was just creepy at night. That I was just spooked from Mark's stupid Zodiac talk. I went back to work. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I started glancing down the long, dark aisles between the shelves. A flicker of movement at the far end of the corridor. I froze again. My heart gave a little kick against my ribs. It was just the lights. The timer on the next section had been triggered. Someone was walking down there. A student, probably, looking for a book. Perfectly normal. But they didn't pass. They didn't come into my aisle. The light at the far end just stayed on. For a long, long time. Meaning someone was standing there. In the dark. Just outside the pool of light. I put the last book away. My movements suddenly stiff, deliberate. I pushed my cart out of the aisle and looked towards the far end. There was no one there. The light was off. I told myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But as I walked back toward the main staircase, I felt his eyes on me. I didn't see him, but I felt him. It was a cold, heavy feeling, like a physical weight. The next night, I saw him. He was sitting at a carrel in the back corner of the main reading room. A place most people avoided because the lighting was poor. I noticed him because he wasn't reading. He was just sitting, staring at the wall. He was a man, maybe in his late 30s or early 40s. He wore thick, horn-rimmed glasses. His hair was dark, cut short in a nondescript, almost military style. He had on a cheap-looking windbreaker, even though it was warm inside. But it was his face. It was a large, round face, pale, almost doughy, and his expression was blank, completely, utterly vacant. He didn't look dangerous. He looked wrong, out of place, like a character from a different story who had wandered onto the wrong set. I went about my business, trying not to look in his direction, but every time I passed the circulation desk, I could feel his gaze shift. I'd glance over from the corner of my eye. He wasn't staring at the wall anymore. He was staring at me, not with any particular expression, just a flat, persistent stare, the way a biologist might observe a specimen in a jar. This went on for a week. Every night, he was there, same carrel, same jacket, same blank stare. He never had a book. He never wrote a single note. He would just sit there for hours, watching, sometimes me, sometimes another student, just watching. I started to feel a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach every time I came into work. I'd scan the reading room, and my shoulders would sag in a weird mix of resignation and dread when I saw him there. Mark, of course, thought I was being dramatic. So a guy's staring at you, he said one night, not looking up from his notes. Maybe he's gay. Alex, ever think of that? It's Berkeley. No, it's not like that, I insisted. It's cold. He looks right through you. There's nothing there. You're just freaked out by the Zodiac stuff. You see a weirdo and you think he's a serial killer. The guy who cracked the cipher, by the way, a history teacher and his wife. Can you believe that? He was right about that. A Salinas schoolteacher, Donald Hardin, and his wife Betty had solved the 408 cipher. The papers printed the translation. It was a rambling, misspelled tirade. I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It went on like that. He talked about collecting slaves for the afterlife. It was the ravings of a lunatic. But a lunatic who was smart enough to create a cipher that stumped the FBI for a week. The translation didn't make me feel better. It made it worse. The killer wasn't just some thug. He was intelligent. He was patient. He was playing a game. And the thought that the man in the library, with his patient, empty stare, could be a part of that game, it started to take root in my mind. One night, I decided to do something. I had to know. He'd been there for about 2 hours. Just sitting. I took a deep breath, walked over to his carrel, and forced a smile. The kind of smile you give a stray dog you're not sure about. "Excuse me, sir," I said, my voice a little too high. "We're closing this section in about 30 minutes. Just wanted to give you a heads up." He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw his eyes clearly. They were pale blue, watery, and utterly devoid of light. They weren't just blank, they were absorptive, like they were taking everything in and giving nothing back. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me. And then, he smiled. It was the most horrifying smile I have ever seen. It didn't reach his eyes. It was just a mechanical pulling back of his lips, showing his teeth. It was a mask, a gesture that was meant to signify, smile, but held none of the meaning. Then he gave a single, slow nod. I practically ran from the table. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I hid behind the circulation desk for the next half hour, pretending to be busy with paperwork, until I saw him get up and leave. He walked with a slight shuffle, a heavy, lumbering gait. After he was gone, I forced myself to walk back to the carrel. I don't know what I was looking for. A clue, something to prove I wasn't crazy. The table was empty, except for a single, small piece of scratch paper left behind. The kind the library leaves out for notes. On it, drawn in ballpoint pen, was a little doodle. It was a circle, with a cross through it, and next to it, a series of symbols, a triangle, a square with a dot in it, a backwards N. They looked like the symbols from the cipher in the newspaper. I stared at it. My blood went cold. This was real. This wasn't in my head. He was leaving me a message. He knew that I knew. He was playing with me. I snatched the piece of paper, my hand shaking. I should have gone to the police. Right then, I should have run out of that library and found the nearest cop and shown it to them. But I didn't, and you have to understand why. I was a 19-year-old kid. What was I going to say? A man who looks a little like the vague description of the Zodiac killer drew a symbol in the library. A symbol that was now on the front page of every newspaper? They would have laughed at me. They would have told me I was a crank. One of 1,000 tips they were getting every day. I had no name, no license plate, nothing, just a weird feeling and a doodle. So I did what any scared, stupid kid would do. I folded the piece of paper. I put it in my wallet. And I went home. He wasn't in the library the next night, or the night after. A week went by. I started to breathe again. I told myself he was gone. A transient, a weirdo who had moved on. The little piece of paper in my wallet felt sillier every day. The memory started to feel dreamlike. And then came Lake Berryessa. September 27, 1969. A beautiful, sunny Saturday afternoon. Lake Berryessa is a man-made lake up in Napa County. It's a recreation area. People go there to picnic, to swim, to lie in the sun. It's a place of peace. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, two college students, were doing just that. They were picnicking on a small, secluded peninsula. It was idyllic. A man approached them from the trees. He was wearing a costume, a bizarre, executioner-style black hood that covered his entire head, with dark glasses sewn over the eyeholes. On his chest, bib-like, was a white symbol, the circle and crosshairs. He was holding a gun. He told them he was an escaped convict from a prison in Montana or Colorado. He said he needed their car and their money to get to Mexico. He was calm, almost polite. He had Cecilia tie up Brian with pre-cut lengths of plastic clothesline. Then he tied her up. Brian tried to talk to him, to reason with him. The man in the hood seemed receptive. They talked about his problems, about the car he wanted. It was all a charade, a horrifying, sadistic game. Once they were helpless, lying face down on the picnic blanket. The man's demeanor changed. He pulled out a long knife. A bayonet, maybe. He stabbed Brian Hartnell 6 times in the back. Brian felt the blade go in, felt the hot, wet sensation of his own blood. He heard Cecilia scream. The man then moved to her and stabbed her again and again. 10 times. A frenzy of violence. Then, as calmly as he had arrived, the killer walked away. He walked back up the hill to Brian's Carman Ghia, and with a black felt tip pen, he drew his symbol on the car door, and underneath it, he wrote a message for the police. Vallejo, December 20th, 68, the 4th of July, 69, September 27th, -69 to 6:30. By knife. He left his scorecard. Then he walked back to the road, got in his own car, and drove away. A fisherman heard their screams. Help was called. Both were alive when they were found. Cecilia Shepard, however, slipped into a coma. She died 2 days later. Brian Hartnell, against all odds, survived to tell the story, to describe the hood, the voice, the terrifying calmness of the man who had tried to murder him in broad daylight. The news hit me like a physical blow. I read it in the Sunday paper, sitting at my kitchen table. The description of the attack, the costume, the symbol on the car door. My hands started to shake. I pulled my wallet out, fumbling with the worn leather. I unfolded the little piece of paper from the library. The circle and cross, the weird, cryptic symbols next to it. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a prank. It was a calling card. The paranoia, which had been a low hum in the back of my mind, became a screaming siren. The man from the library wasn't just a weirdo. He could be. I started seeing him everywhere. Walking home from campus, I'd see a man in a windbreaker across the street. and my breath would catch in my throat. I'd duck into a doorway, my heart hammering, and wait for him to pass. It was never him, just some random person, but for a few seconds, the phone in our apartment started doing strange things. I'd pick it up, and there'd be silence on the other end. Not a dead line, an open line. I could hear breathing. A slow, steady, in and out. I'd whisper, "Hello?" And the breathing would just continue for a few seconds before a soft click. Mark told me it was the wiring in our old building. He said I was losing it. "You need to relax, man," he'd say, shaking his head. "You're letting this get to you. It's a city of millions of people. You think the one psycho in the whole Bay Area decided to fixate on you? The library assistant?" His logic made sense. But fear isn't logical. Fear is a reptile. It lives in your brainstem. And my fear was telling me that I had been noticed. I had been singled out. That I had stumbled into the monster's path. And he hadn't forgotten me. I started changing my routines. I'd take different routes home from work. I stopped going out after dark unless I had to. At the library, I stayed at the main desk. I refused to go into the stacks alone. I felt like a hunted animal. Every shadow held a threat. Every unexpected noise was a footstep. One night, about a week after the Lake Berryessa attack, I was walking home. It was late, close to 1 a.m. The streets of Berkeley were mostly deserted. A thick fog was rolling in from the bay, swallowing the streetlights, muffling the world in a damp, gray blanket. I heard a car behind me. It was moving slowly, too slowly. Its engine was a low rumble, crawling along at my walking pace. I didn't look back. I just walked faster. The car stayed with me. Its headlights were two fuzzy orbs in the fog, projecting my long, dancing shadow in front of me. My apartment was another block away. My keys felt like a block of ice in my hand. I started to half jog. The car sped up slightly, keeping pace. I told myself not to look. Don't give him the satisfaction. Just get to the door. Get inside. Get safe. My building's entrance was in a small, recessed alcove. I fumbled with the key, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit it in the lock. The car pulled to a stop right across the street. The engine was still running. A low, patient thrum. I got the door open, stumbled inside, and slammed it shut behind me. I didn't bother with the lights. I ran to my front window and peeked through the blinds. It was a light-colored sedan. A Ford, maybe, or a Chevy. I couldn't tell for sure in the fog. The windows were dark. I couldn't see the driver. It just sat there, idling, for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5, an eternity. And then, its headlights blinked off. A moment of pure darkness. Then they blinked back on. Once, twice, a slow, deliberate signal. And then it pulled away, its taillights disappearing into the fog. I collapsed to the floor, my back against the wall, gasping for air. I was drenched in a cold sweat. It was him. It had to be him. The man from the library. The man who drew the symbol. He had followed me home. He was showing me that he could. He was showing me that the library wasn't the only place he could find me. The walls of my own apartment suddenly felt as thin as paper. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, watching the street, a kitchen knife on the floor beside me. I felt pathetic and terrified. The next day, I went to the campus police. I sat in a sterile little office, across the desk from a bored-looking officer with a thick mustache. I told him everything. The man in the library, the stare, the doodle, the phone calls, the car. He listened patiently, making a few notes on a pad. When I was finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Son," he said, not unkindly, "we've had dozens of these. I saw a guy who looked suspicious. A car followed me. People are on edge. This Zodiac fella has everyone spooked. You see a weird guy. Your imagination fills in the blanks. The drawing, you saw it in the paper. You got thinking about it. Maybe you even dreamed it. The mind plays tricks. The car," I said, my voice cracking. "He followed me home. Did he threaten you? Did he try to contact you? Did you get a license plate?" "No," I admitted, but he blinked his lights at me. The officer gave me a look of pity. "Look, kid, there's nothing we can do. There's no crime here. A guy sat in a library. A car drove down your street. My advice? Forget about it. Stop reading the sensationalist newspaper articles. Focus on your studies. He stood up, signaling the interview was over. Stay safe out there, he said, as a parting gesture. I walked out of that police station feeling more alone and more terrified than ever before. He was right. I had no proof. I had nothing. I was just another hysterical kid. The monster was real, but to everyone else, my monster was just a shadow. My fear was my own private prison. And the worst part was, a small part of me started to believe him. Maybe I was just imagining it. Maybe I was going crazy. And then, 2 weeks later, the Zodiac killed again. This time, in the heart of San Francisco. And this time, he broke all his own rules. October 11, 1969, a Saturday night. The city was alive, but there was a new edge to it. The news from Lake Berryessa had changed things. The Zodiac wasn't just some phantom who attacked kids on lonely roads anymore. He was a performer in a costume. He was a sadist, and he was still out there. He had sent more letters. A new one arrived at the Chronicle just after the Berryessa attack. In it, he was practically giddy. He talked about his nice new knife. He threatened to shoot up a school bus. Just shoot out the front tire and then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out. The entire Bay Area was on high alert. Police cars were shadowing school buses. Parents were terrified. The fear was a fever. I was living in that fever. I had quit my job at the library. I told my supervisor I needed to focus on my classes. But that was a lie. I couldn't set foot in that building again. Every time I even thought about it, I could feel those pale, watery eyes on me. Mark was planning to go into the city that night. Some concert at the Fillmore. He asked me to come. It'll be good for you. Man, he said, pulling on his jacket. Get out of this apartment. Get out of your own head. I refused. The idea of being in a crowd, of being out in the city at night, it was unthinkable. But after he left, the silence of the apartment was deafening. Every creak of the floorboards, every rattle of the window pane was a footstep, a hand on the latch. I felt like I was going to crawl out of my skin. I had to get out, but not to a concert. Just out. I grabbed my car keys. I had an old, beat-up Volkswagen Beetle. It was noisy and unreliable, but it was freedom. I just started driving, no destination in mind. I drove across the Bay Bridge, the lights of the city skyline glittering like a promise of something exciting and dangerous. I ended up in Presidio Heights. It's a wealthy, quiet neighborhood, big, stately homes, manicured lawns, clean streets. It felt a million miles away from the Zodiac's usual hunting grounds. It felt safe. I parked my Beetle on a side street, killed the engine, and just sat there, listening to the radio. I must have been there for an hour, just breathing, watching the occasional car glide by. The fog was starting to creep in here, too, softening the edges of the big houses, making the streetlights glow with halos. I felt calm. For the first time in weeks, I convinced myself the campus cop was right. I had let my imagination run away with me. The man in the library was just a weirdo. The car that followed me was just a coincidence. It was all in my head. It was around 9:55 p.m. I remember the time because the DJ on the radio announced it. I was about to start the car and head home. And then I saw it. A yellow taxicab. It came down the street and pulled over to the curb, just about 50 yards ahead of me, at the corner of Washington and Cherry Street. Nothing unusual about that, but I was watching, idly. The dome light came on inside the cab. I could see two figures. The driver, in the front, and a passenger in the back, leaning forward. My body went rigid. The passenger, he was a man. He wore glasses. He had a short, dark crew cut, and even from that distance, I could see the shape of his face. It was large, heavy set. I couldn't look away. My mind was screaming coincidence, but my gut was screaming danger. The passenger seemed to be talking to the driver. I saw the driver's head move, and then, the passenger, he lunged forward. It was a sudden, violent movement. I couldn't see exactly what happened. The dome light made everything inside a strange silhouette play, but it looked like the passenger was wrestling with the driver. I should have done something. Laid on my horn, flashed my lights, anything, but I was frozen, paralyzed by a combination of fear and disbelief. I was telling myself I was misinterpreting what I was seeing. It was a fair dispute. An argument. The struggle lasted only a few seconds. Then, everything stopped. The passenger slid back into the back seat. The dome light was still on. He sat there for a moment. Then he leaned forward again. Over the front seat, he seemed to be doing something. Wiping something down, maybe. His movements were calm, deliberate. My heart felt like it was going to explode. This was wrong. Terribly wrong. I reached for my door handle. Then stopped. What was I going to do? Run over there? He got out of the cab. From the passenger side, he was a white male. Stocky. Wearing a dark jacket. He walked around the front of the cab, opened the driver's side door, and leaned in again. He was doing something with the driver. It looked like he was tearing a piece of his shirt. And then he closed the door, and calmly, without any sense of urgency, started walking away, down Cherry Street, heading north. My brain finally caught up with my terror. He's leaving. He's walking away. This was my chance. I needed to get out of there. Or I needed to get a better look at him. Some part of me, some idiotic, morbidly curious part, took over. Instead of driving away, I started my car. The Beetle's engine coughed to life with a loud, sputtering roar. The man, who was now about a block away, stopped. He turned. He looked right at me. Right at my car. And he saw me. The fog was thin here. The streetlight caught his face. Thick glasses. A round, pale face. It was him. It was the man from the library. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He just stood there. And he watched me. For a long, drawn-out second. Our eyes met from 100 yards away. And then, he raised a hand. Not in a wave. It was more like a gesture of acknowledgment. A silent signal. I see you. Then he turned and continued walking, disappearing into the foggy darkness of the Presidio Park. I didn't wait for another second. I slammed the car into gear and I drove. I have never driven so fast in my life. I ran red lights. I swerved through traffic. I didn't slow down until the Bay Bridge was in my rearview mirror. When I got back to my apartment, I was shaking so violently I could barely stand. Mark wasn't home yet. I locked the door, bolted it, and pushed our sofa in front of it. I turned on the TV. And I waited. Around 11 p.m., a news bulletin interrupted the late-night movie. I remember the newscaster's voice cutting through the film's soundtrack. We interrupt this program with a breaking news story. A San Francisco taxi driver has been shot and killed in what appears to be a robbery in the Presidio Heights neighborhood. Police were called to the scene at the corner of Washington and Cherry Streets at approximately 10 p.m. My blood ran cold. I sank to the floor. The newscaster continued. The victim was Paul Stine, 29 years old. Shot once in the head. His wallet and keys were taken. A piece of his blood-soaked shirt had been torn away. The police had initially been dispatched to the scene for a robbery. A group of teenagers across the street had seen the man in the cab and called it in. The dispatcher, however, had mistakenly reported the suspect was a black male. So when two officers arrived on the scene, just minutes after the murder, they saw a heavy-set white man walking away from the area. They stopped and asked him if he'd seen anything. He told them he'd seen a man with a gun running in the opposite direction. And the officers, they believed him. They let him go. They let the Zodiac killer walk right past them. He had walked right past a police car, just moments after I saw him, and he had disappeared into the night. I was a witness. I had seen him. I had seen his face. But I had run. And in the official story, the only witnesses were the kids across the street, who only saw him from a distance, through a window. My story, it didn't exist, because I was too scared to tell it. The days and weeks that followed are a blur, a haze of fear and guilt. I dropped out of my classes. I told Mark one was sick, that I had mono. It was an easy lie. I certainly felt like the Walking Dead. I barely left the apartment. 2 days after the murder of Paul Stine, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle. It was from the Zodiac. This is the Zodiac speaking. It began. He described the murder of the cab driver in detail. And then, he included a piece of proof. A swatch of cloth, cut from Paul Stine's shirt. It was stained with his blood. He mocked the police. He talked about how they had stopped and talked to him. The police shall never catch me, he wrote, because I am too clever for them. He ended the letter with a new threat. The threat against the school children. He was gloating. He was invincible. And I had sat in my car and watched him walk away. The guilt was a physical thing. It was a weight in my chest that made it hard to breathe. Why didn't I call the police from a payphone? Why didn't I write down the license plate of the cab? Why did I just run? The answer is simple. I was terrified. He had seen me. He had acknowledged me. In my terrified mind, that created a link between us. If I went to the police, he would know it was me. The man from the library. The boy in the Beetle. And he would come for me. He knew what I looked like. He had followed me home once before. What was to stop him from doing it again? The police released a new composite sketch, based on the description from the officers who stopped him and the teenagers who saw him through the window. It was a man with glasses and a crew cut. A heavy-set man. I looked at that sketch in the newspaper, and my stomach churned. It looked a bit like him. The glasses were right, the general shape of the face. But it was generic. It could have been 1,000 men. It didn't capture the eyes. It didn't capture the deadness. The absolute emptiness behind that blank expression. Over the years, I've followed the case obsessively. It's been the one constant ghost in my life. I've read every book, watched every documentary. I know all the names of the main suspects. Arthur Lee Allen, with his thick build and his knowledge of ciphers. The prime suspect for decades. But the evidence was always circumstantial. The DNA, the handwriting, the fingerprints, none of it ever conclusively matched. I've looked at pictures of him. Of all of them, Rick Marshall, Lawrence Kane, Ross Sullivan, do any of them look like the man I saw in the library? The man I saw on Cherry Street? Sometimes, I think so. I'll see a photograph of Allen, and for a second, I'll see the same heavy brow, the same shape of the face. But then I'll look at another photo, and he'll look completely different. Memory is a traitor. It's a photograph that fades and changes color over time. After 50 years, what do I really remember? A pale face? Glasses? A feeling? The man I saw is my own private suspect. He has no name. He has no history. He's just the man in the library. My personal Zodiac. Maybe he was just a lonely, creepy man who got his kicks from unsettling college kids. Maybe the car that followed me was just a coincidence. Maybe the man I saw get out of that cab in Presidio Heights was a complete stranger. A different person entirely, and my panicked mind just superimposed the face of the library man onto him. That's the theory I've tried to live with. It's the sane theory. It's the theory that lets me sleep at night. But it doesn't explain the doodle, the circle and cross, drawn on a piece of library scratch paper. Days before the killer used a pen to draw the same symbol on Brian Hartnell's car door. It doesn't explain the feeling of being watched by those pale, empty eyes. It doesn't explain the slow, deliberate blink of the headlights outside my apartment. It doesn't explain the chilling wave of acknowledgment on that foggy street corner. The Zodiac sent more letters, more ciphers. Some have never been solved. He claimed more victims, though they could never be confirmed. And then, after 1974, he just stopped. He went silent. The letters ceased. The killings stopped. The Zodiac just vanished. Did he die? Did he go to prison for another crime? Or did he just get bored of his game and decide to live a normal life? To grow old. To become a grandfather. A friendly neighbor who waves at you when you get the morning paper. That's the most terrifying theory of all. Not that he was a monster, but that he was a man. A man who could wear the mask of a monster, perform his rituals of death, and then take the mask off and blend back into the crowd. A man who could sit in a library, night after night, watching, waiting. A man who could look you in the eye after committing an atrocity, and offer a quiet, confident smile. I moved away from the Bay Area a year later. I finished my degree elsewhere. I got a job. I got married. I had children. I built a life. A normal life. I put the little piece of paper from the library in a small box. And I put the box in the back of a closet. But I never threw it away. Every few years, the case resurfaces. A new book. A new DNA test. A new theory. And every time, I feel that old, familiar chill. That crack in the ice. I'm an old man now. The world of 1969 feels like a different planet. But the fear is timeless. The ghost is patient. I still find myself scanning faces in a crowd, looking for a pair of pale, Watery eyes behind thick glasses. I still feel a jolt of panic when a car slows down behind me on a quiet street at night. I never told my wife this story. Or my kids. How could I? How do you explain a fear that has no face, no name, and no resolution? How do you explain that for one terrifying autumn, you believe you were in the orbit of pure evil, and you did nothing but run? This story, like the case itself, remains open, unsolved. The truth is, I'll never know for sure if the man I encountered was the Zodiac. But I know what I saw, and I know how it felt, and I know that it changed me forever. It taught me that the mundane world we live in is a fragile facade. And that sometimes, if you look too closely into the shadows, you might see the shadows looking back. And that was not the last strange thing that happened to me. But that's a story for another time.